As we come back from break, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Saenz, who's going to kick off our student and educator panel.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Saenz, and I'm the Senior Director in Strategic Initiatives and Continuous Improvement for E3 Alliance, and extremely delighted and honored to have the opportunity to moderate this guest panel. As Susan stated, this has not been a traditional year. This is especially true for our students and educators. When I reflect on what Sylvia shared with us earlier regarding her learned persistence and resiliency early in her educational career, provided her the mindset and skills to overcome so many obstacles and accomplish the level of success she has thus far. This, I believe, are the same skills that our guest panel attain and why they are here and able to share their success and lessons learned with us. If time permits, we will have questions for our participants. So if you have any throughout the panel, please drop them in chat. And at the end of the questions that I ask of our panel, I will try to get to some of those. So happy to introduce our guest panel who will share their experiences here. We first have Hoda Tavakoli with us. She is an assistant professor of mathematics at Houston-Tillotson University and an associate adjunct professor of mathematics at Austin Community College. Hoda has 15 years experience in higher ed and high school. She has more than 7 years of experience teaching math at ACC and at Houston-Tillotson. So thank you, Hoda, for joining us. We have Jania Jackson, who will be a high school sophomore next year, and her hopes is to go to college after high school and study pre-med. Welcome, Jania. We also have Lucky Cantu with us, who's a rising freshman. And although college is far away for Lucky, she dreams of going to college in New York, teaching one day in China, and being on Broadway someday. She is a theater student, and we're so excited to have her with us to share her experience from middle school and now as she's a rising freshman. Next, we have Marcia Holsen, who is a 5th grade ELA and second language acquisition teacher in Hayes CISD. She has been teaching for over 7 years, and we're really excited to hear her experience and lessons learned as she transitioned through the pandemic this year. Next, joining us is Esme Aguilar, who's an incoming sophomore at the American University, majoring in international relations. Esme is also engaging in an internship this year, so we're excited to hear her experience and lessons learned as well. And last, but definitely not least, we have Khalil Woodson with us, who graduated this semester from Pflugerville High School. Congratulations, and plans to study patient care technician and be a patient care technician at Texas State University in the fall. So I welcome all our panelists with us this morning. Thank you all for being here. What a wonderful opportunity to really hear from you about your experience and lessons learned this last academic year. So I have some questions that I'll ask each of our panelists, and we'll get to hear from each of them, so I'm excited. But like I said, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and at the end, if we have time, we'll definitely ask those as well. So I'm going to start with Marcia on this particular question. So if you can answer for us, how would you describe your overall educational experience this year?
Thank you. I think the best way that for me to comprehensively describe my educational experience this year is becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. So for example, in the elementary setting, every grade level, instructionally speaking, was doing something different. They had a completely different format depending on the numbers of the students who were in person or virtual. And sometimes uncomfortable scenarios that needed to become comfortable were things like students switching constantly. We didn't know how many students were going to be in our classroom at any given day because they were allowed to switch and leave and come as they wanted to, or as their parents wanted to. One thing that was particularly uncomfortable was sharing a classroom. I always had my own classroom, but this year, because the teachers switched and the students stayed put, I was sharing my classroom with 3 other teachers, and I was going into 3 other teachers' classrooms. So we had to really be more aware of our space and how we organized ourselves. And so, yes, I would just explain the whole thing as being getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
I love that explanation. Thank you for sharing. Khalil, would you help us understand what your educational experience was like?
Yes, ma'am. So in the beginning of COVID, I had moved from Houston to Austin. And so I moved into a new environment, which was a virtual learning setting. And so I'm getting to school, early, and it's just like I'm not able to have that interaction with my teachers or my peers, bounce ideas and feedbacks off to help me better understand the topic at hand. So it was a real adjustment, especially learning virtually. And so I had to adapt with a very dedicated mindset to set a goal for myself that I can do it. I just have to take the time out, use proper time management, and everything was just gonna be fine.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to grade the school year, I would probably give it a C plus. I feel like it ran a lot better than the spring semester of 2020 in terms of technical issues and teachers understanding and us students understanding what was going on. But I feel like this year, I wouldn't really consider it a success for me as a student because when I was learning, I feel like our lessons didn't really go above and beyond. It was a lot of slideshows and worksheets and didn't feel as interactive as it has in years past. Our lessons didn't go in depth. So when testing came around as a student, I felt really unprepared, especially when I went back to in-person school to take our standardized tests. I felt almost scared. And I feel like it wasn't very engaging and it was very bare minimum, which made me really sad because I love all of my teachers and I respect what they do. And so it made me sad that we were so limited this year in our abilities to communicate.
Good morning, everyone, and happy to be here. Same for Lucky, for us, for as an educator person, it was different experience. I often find myself to work much more hours, longer hours to just be prepared for the classes. And I learned how tough I and myself and my students could be, and how we are persistent to do our best to be success for my case, to do a great job for my students to succeeding in my course. And I can say the last year was a year to become more friend with technology usage, and also learning to be more patient and more flexible whenever it comes to the due date and technical issue. And also be aware of students' mental health, and just keep telling them you are not alone to go through this difficulty. This year will pass. Be understanding of your surrounding, be kind to one another, be kind to your parents, and etc. I found myself to a lot of times highlighting those are to my students, and in general to be more supportive, more understanding, more caring, and more encouraging. Sometimes I told my students that whenever we go back to the normal, please stop by my office and introduce yourself. Let me add a nice face to your familiar voice. And I just want to tell them, I know the pandemic will be over. I am believing in you. I know you would be in a school, you will finishing your degree, and I believe in you and I want to see you. It was different.
To describe my experience, since I was going into high school at the time, I had to adjust of what the teachers were going to be like and how the schedule is going to be. And at the time, I was also in a different state because of the pandemic. And I didn't really have anybody to help me really transition. So as starting the year, I was trying to figure out how would I go through the year. And I had to change my mindset and figure out how to work around it. but I could always get help, like email some teachers to see if they can help me or not. And you never really know if they're going to show up to class or not until like later. So it was always a guessing game for me. But overall, it was pretty hard to figure out new material from teachers.
I was simply grateful to have had the opportunity to continue my education in a virtual setting. I'd say it went well, but it was lonely. Since the spring of 2020, I held the biggest grudge towards online learning because I was now finishing high school, classes online. I no longer had my friends there. However, starting classes online in a new school at the university level, I knew I needed to shift my attitude, but it was hard. Not a lot of my classmates were in Austin. We were scattered all over the country. So that was definitely an isolating experience, but I am grateful that I was able to have classes at all.
Wow, it's such positive messages. Thank you all for sharing. I heard a lot about just changing your mindset, right? And just the adjustment. I love that Khalil shared how he had to set a goal for himself, right? Knowing that he was transitioning not just in a pandemic year, but moving from one city to the next, and Jania as well. Thank you so much for sharing that and for being honest, because I think that's how we're going to gain an understanding of how we start preparing for the reentry and reintegration of next year, both in our classrooms in the pre-K-12 space, but also in the college setting as well. So can you share any challenges that you encountered to your success this year with remote learning and or hybrid learning? Like call out some of those specific challenges. I'm going to start with Khalil, and then if the rest of the panel will just follow.
Okay, I've been waiting on this topic. Okay, so with virtual learning, there was like no way you could be prepared for that, especially if you were a senior this year like me. It kind of just hit you hard and you were just thrown in to figure it out yourself. So one of the things I struggled with was being on time for class because my teachers, they didn't have proper communication going on. And so I would always be late or sometimes absent. So I really had to adjust to waking up every day, making sure I'm in this class, have my assignments printed ready, make sure that the material is correct and done. It was just a whole nother process I had to learn all over again.
Yeah, and I mean, adjusting to the technical issues with connection as well as adjusting to the disconnect between teachers and students was really difficult. I was in middle school this year and it was my last year. And so my assignments got a little bit harder to prepare me for high school. And it felt like there was a disconnect between what was going on in the classroom and then what was going on Zoom. I was able to kind of see through the camera what was going on at school. And I felt like I was missing out on some of the things that were learned at in-person school. But at the same time, I could see when my teachers would focus more on us on Zoom, but then I could hear the kids at school talking. So I was curious as to how teachers were able to bridge that gap, because it seems like it was so difficult for both students and teachers alike.
And same as Lucky, it was a lot of connection issue for my side, a lot of students not having a reliable internet and constantly coming and going out of the classroom. That was one challenge. The other challenge that I can mention, it was a student engagement. I always needed to look for another new strategy that I can bring them out of their shells. I can allow them to participate in the lectures, in their group activities. And another challenge that I felt bad to not be able to provide them a quiet area whenever they were taking the exam. Whenever for younger students, they had to take care of the younger siblings, and for the older students, they had a toddler going all over them while they're taking the exam. I should have told myself to be considerate whenever, for all those scenarios, whenever I was doing the grading. And basically another challenge, any simple task in the online environment took much longer time to be prepared for it. And one last thing that I should always consider myself, about the equity gap. I'm teaching the HBCU universities, historically Black college and universities, which a lot of my students are considered as more vulnerable population. And during the pandemic, they were suffering the most and they had to go to work longer hours. I needed to just consider those are and allowing them, giving everybody a chance to succeed in my course. I found it more challenging for my case.
My biggest challenge, I have a lot of siblings, so there was multiple major distractions. It was kind of hard for me to understand the material because I had never taken that class before. So, and people like to ask me for help because I was the person they would go to. So I had to try and figure out ways to get better information that I couldn't have gotten in class and then help them too, even my siblings, because sometimes they needed help with their own work. And I just had to learn how to balance. And I also used to cook because most of my siblings are younger than me. So it's like raising children, but I've had a little bit of help. And my parents work, so we couldn't really ask them. And they usually didn't remember anything. So I just used like Quizlet, or I'll just go on Google to see if any website could help me. That was like my biggest challenge.
I'd say the most challenging component was trying to establish connections online, because you don't want to be working on all your assignments alone. You want to get to know your classmates, but in a virtual setting, that can be hard balancing screen time because you've been staring at a screen all day, like joining clubs and wanting to be involved. Like you want to be doing that, but you also don't want to be sitting inside all day. I'd say another hard thing for me personally was time zones. I'm in Central Time, but my classes were in DC time. So I was getting up an hour earlier than most of my classmates, and everyone says don't take the 8 a.m., but I was taking the 7 a.m. my first semester, and that was very brutal, but luckily we survived.
I would say one of my biggest challenges this year was, and just like Hoda had said, it was student engagement, student attendance, just getting them to show up to a virtual class, and then also virtual work ethic, and helping them to realize that even though they were still at home, they were still in school. And that's a very difficult concept for an elementary child to comprehend, is that even when you're at home, you're really in school. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense. So my team and I brainstormed, and we found that the best way to ameliorate the situation really was to get parents involved. So we had constant parent communication. And so that really led to our success this year, overcoming that challenge of very low student engagement by getting parents involved. And sometimes I feel like we pestered them. However, it got the student where we wanted them to be, which was in school with us. So.
Thank you all for sharing so many great things. I mean, I think one of the things that's really important to point out around the family, right? Really having to understand the family's role, not just in helping and supporting the student, but also the student's role in helping and supporting their family during this pandemic, and how that put pressure on them and impacted their own opportunity to learn and be engaged in school. But, I heard some really great things, right, around some of those social skills that were learned. I think Khalil started talking about just having to manage, right? Jania shared having to self-advocate. Like when she didn't understand, she had to reach out to the instructor. I loved what Lucky said about this idea of disconnection, right? There was opportunity, the lack of connection, that you kept losing connection in the Zoom or in whatever learning platform they were using, but also the disconnection from your peers and from your teacher, but not physically being in the room. And so thank you for sharing those. And kind of why I pull these out is I believe that with even in this crazy year, that there was a lot of positive gain. And so what are some positive aspects of remote learning or hybrid classes that have enhanced your knowledge and skills as a student or an educator? And I'd love to start with Hoda on this question. The panelists just follow.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to look at it in two aspects, one for me, one for my students. If I want to say what was a positive aspect of a virtual learning for my case, I'm going to say all my traffic times turned into the learning times, which was a positive thing. And I learned a lot of technology usage skills. I wasn't afraid to just jump in, learning new software or something that could help my students, could help their engagement. Some other positive thing that I can think of, it was more collaboration between faculties of my school and also between different school, collaborating with more different school in order to coming up with the best solution. Sharing ideas was something that I cannot be more thankful of pandemic, because of the amount of experience, the amount of information I learned from my colleagues. The other thing, it was the sort of easy access to my students. My students were just one phone call away from me, one team, a Microsoft team phone call away from me. Same thing for faculty. There was a lot of free workshop to attend, a lot of conferences, a lot of professional development opportunity for myself. And the last thing that I can think of, being able to teach early college start classes, being able to teach a class that dual credit classes in ACC, that it was all high school students, which was a new experience for me. And thanks to pandemic, if it wasn't because of that, I was not have the time to go and teaching those type of classes. That's from my point of view. Whenever I look to my students, what was their positive, their advantages during the pandemic compared to the previous year, I can think of more class attendance. Apparently, they were able to come to the class more oftenly. They were able to use my office hours more frequently. And also, I can say they were more understanding and supporting of one and another. They were trying to jump and help any other students if they had any difficulty. They were more looking for collaborating outside of the classroom, making their own groups and trying to chat with each other, communicate with each other throughout the semester, having the recorded lecture available for them. If they miss something, going back and rewatching those that was, I believe, one positive aspect for it. And having a tutor from the comfort of their own home was another thing that it was sort of a positive aspect for my students.
A positive aspect for me is learning how to work with complete strangers and coming together to make a product, no matter what assignment it is. You also learn how to be flexible and understanding, just as Honda said, because you never had met these people before. And it's very easier to come to class. And since we're not in person, you can always just use your laptop everywhere, just in case if you had a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment. And if you even had any issues. And the teachers will understand if you can't come to class based off your internet and stuff like that. So you know how good people can be. And knowing that, yeah, there's people that got your back, even though you don't really know them.
I would say as an introvert, I think classes, especially large classes, can be a bit intimidating. So being in the comfort of my own room allowed me for me to focus on my material more closely. I could use the raised hand feature or message my professor directly. So that sometimes takes off the worry of having to awkwardly just raise your hand and everyone's watching you. I'd say recorded lectures were also definitely a lifesaver. And in a sense, being able to do more because you're not worrying about commuting. I was able to serve as a tutor for high school students in DC, so both in completely different areas, but I was able to be in their classroom and then attend class because it's all virtual. I'm not having to worry about getting to my next class because it's right in front of me. So that was very helpful and rewarding.
For me, as an educator, a positive aspect of this type of learning was realizing that I have the power to change the narrative from learning loss and, oh, this is awful, and I've lost all my students and no one's learning. Well, there was learning and it wasn't all that bad. And so to be able to see the silver lining and to know that I have the power to change my perspective and my mindset and motivate others to do the same, or I can stay where I am and complain and motivate others to do the same. So I know that my attitude affects others. And just one thing that I did learn is that as far as educating, one way to get them there as far as this acceleration is picking the most important concepts and teaching them versus just sort of teaching everything. So those were a few of the positive aspects that came out of this for me as an educator.
Yeah, I mean, as a student, my technical skills went way up. I had no idea how to do any of the stuff that I now do on a daily basis. So it's definitely a learning experience. And as a student, I love doing self-paced projects. I love book reports or writing an article for my school newspaper. Those are things that make me happy. And because of this environment, we got to do a lot of working on stuff on our own. But because of working stuff on our own, I realized how much I missed those meaningful lessons that I got from my teachers and the interactions that I had on a daily basis that I didn't realize I was having until I didn't have them anymore.
Learning virtually opened up so many opportunities for me that I wouldn't have discovered if I was to attend face to face. I participated in so many clubs, programs, and actually got a couple of scholarships. And I'm just really grateful that virtual did actually happen because I don't think I would have been sitting where I am right now without that guidance and support that it taught me.
I love that, and congratulations. Scholarships are always a huge thing, so that's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing the chat too of people really loving that you've shared kind of some of those positive things, right? That we all realize there were challenges, and I love what Marcia said, that we have the power to change the narrative, and it really is our mindset and how we approach things. I loved hearing just the flexibility that it, right? And I'm with you, Hoda, minus the traffic, right? I don't know that any of us, I think all of us are ready to be in a room together and hug, but man, that traffic getting to the office is not looking forward to. So thank you for sharing those. What I also want to ask is, what were the resources or who were the people that you relied on for guidance and direction on how to best set yourself up for success this year? And who gave you the best advice? What was the best advice you received and who gave that to you? So just kind of thinking about the resources and the people that really helped guide you, and then any good advice you received or who gave you that advice. And I'd love to start with you, Jania, and then if the rest of the panel will answer as well.
The teachers that gave me the best advice was my English teacher and my biology teacher. They both talked about life lessons and life skills that you will actually need in life. My English teacher, she will try to find ways to connect with her students. So she would tell us stories of her college days or high school. So when we had to write an essay or something like that, she would give us some help and guidance to know how to write it and what to expect. My biology teacher, she would give us assignments and she will teach us how to find what instruments or what websites will help you do better in the classroom. So she would make us go find an article about something we really like and figure out if that article is reliable or not. And it was very helpful.
I would say Goni Madre was an amazing resource for me because I've been with that organization since 5th grade. So they've really been there along the way. They would have semesters check-in that allowed me to reflect on my experiences throughout both semesters, and just having that space to talk about my experiences definitely was a confidence boost, just because oftentimes our own efforts go unrecognized from ourselves. So while we may be doing all these things, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit, especially being in a pandemic. Like, simply doing things in a pandemic is already going above and beyond, and we don't recognize that sometimes. I would also say my parents, as a first generation student, they were my biggest support and continue to support me in my studies because they valued that. They valued that I was able to continue to take classes online and took it just as seriously as I did. So that was very helpful and rewarding, and I'm very excited to be able to continue my studies.
Okay, so my best resource this year were my colleagues on my campus. They were just incredible. Everyone came together, we shared ideas, we collaborated on what worked and what didn't work, because no one really knew. No one has enough. We haven't been doing this long enough for anyone to really become a guru at doing it. So it was all hit or miss. And so sharing those things that worked and the things that didn't helped us become more efficient teachers. And the best advice that I received this year was, whatever you do, make it so the students want to come back the next day. You know, like, give them a reason to sign in on that Zoom the next day. And so after I got that advice, I reflected and I started doing a lot more activities with my students where that had nothing to do with academics. They were completely SEL activities where anyone could participate. It could be my English language learner who was a beginner, or my student who was identified as special education, just something where they could all participate and share and make those social connections.
For me, my least favorite class usually is either math or science. And this year, I think science was especially difficult because my teacher, who started the year, did not end up finishing the year with us. We had another teacher come in about mid-year and take over. And at first I was really skeptical because I was like, that's not my real teacher. But I realized that this was probably the best person about my 8th grade year. My teacher came in and immediately was the person that I could talk to about more than just science, but also about things going on in my life, and was somebody that I felt like I could share with, and somebody that I felt like I could come to with my problems about not just her class, but some of my other classes. So I was really thankful for her. And I was very thankful for my mom, who encouraged me to be more organized when it comes to my learning, and be like, keeping a calendar, I learned, is really important when keeping track of your assignments and making sure that I'm always on time. Things that I never really had to worry about in an in-person setting, I suddenly had to in this new world. And so I'm thankful for both my science teacher and my mom.
Well, with me going into senior year, I was totally unprepared. And honestly, in the beginning, I didn't even know what to do. I got into senior year, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where I'm going to go to school at. And learning virtually, I had connections with my college career counselor. So one day he sent me an email. He wanted to meet. We met and we discussed FAFSA, college options, budgeting, everything. He just laid it all out on the table, and that really opened my eyes on how many resources I had at my very own school that I wasn't utilizing. And another person that helped me was my MBK advisor. She constantly reached out to me, encouraged me when I was late on assignments. She was like, "William, you get this done." She was always on top of me, and I think because of her, I achieved what I achieved this year.
And for me, as Marcia stated, my fellow faculties were the best resources. I cannot say how many times, 10, 11, midnight, we were chatting, we were making a Zoom meeting to making sure that we would have the needed resources for the next day. And also my students' feedback, honest feedback, I rely on those are a lot. I keep asking them how I can improve the lecturing, how I can improve it to better assist you success this course. And I was willing to do the changes and to the best of my ability and helping them succeeding the course. The other thing that I can say for the resources, a lot of software and platform that they were available. If basically one of them didn't work, try the other one. Maybe that other platform or software is just something that your student needed it. And a lot of tutorial videos that they came with it, same as a very friendly IT department. It was I keep contacting them, trying to make it better and better for my students. And in general, what was the best advice? It was through one of my training in Dana Center, which one of my colleagues mentioned that as you know, as Lucky mentioned, I'm teaching math, and math is not some favorable subject for all the students. So whenever it comes to asking them a question, a lot of students were shy, and it was nice to telling them, well, be confidently wrong, be prepared to ask questions, be prepared to make mistakes. Any mistake that you're making in the math classes, they are positive mistakes. You will learn from it and you will not make those mistakes during the exam time or whenever you're doing your assignment. Then being confidently wrong was something that I found myself to telling my students very often. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you all for sharing. Such great advice that you were given. And I just love what Esme said early on, right? That we all needed to give ourselves grace, that what we did this year was amazing, even though it didn't always feel that way. And so I just love that. And I heard a lot about collaborating, right? Being able, having that support system around you, whether it was your faculty, your peers, or a counselor or support system. I also loved hearing two of the programs that we work very closely with, Con Mi Madre and My Brother's Keeper, being such a good resource for our students, and knowing that they have organizations like that around that really do stand beside students and mentor them and help engage them through this process. So thank you all for sharing. That's such wonderful advice. So our next question is, what were some lessons learned that will help you for next year? Like, what are you carrying on into next year that you really think is going to empower you to be as successful or even more successful as we start this academic year? And I'd love to start with you, Esme, on this question.
I'd say definitely time management and being organized, both in a virtual and in-person setting. Like, for me, just because my laptop was right there, I learned that I should not wake up 3 minutes before class. So giving myself time to show up and be prepared to be engaged. And while we can't be prepared for everything that is thrown our way, we can definitely find the courage to ask for help and support and know that we don't have to do it alone.
Awesome. So I think of the questions, this is my favorite question. I've learned a lot of lessons this year. First one, parent involvement is crucial. It's always crucial in any student's education, but this year it was extra important. The second one, continue to take risks if it's in the best interest of the child and the student. And of course, we all take risks and for our students, but this year I just felt like it was really particularly important to do that for our students. Another one, never underestimate the student. And so I hear you all, Jania and Lucky, I hear you guys talking. I'm like, that's right there. Never underestimate the power of our youth. And you too, Khalil. Don't assume things about students and their families. We missed so much of that this year, and all I could really see was maybe what was happening on the camera. And so I felt like I was beginning to make assumptions about my students and my families, and I didn't like the way that that was feeling and the way that it made me act. And so I had to reevaluate that. And also, and I've heard all of you guys saying, don't be afraid to ask questions. No one is like I said before, no one's the guru. We're all just learning. And so I really had to learn, like, it's okay to ask questions, keep learning, keep asking questions, even if it sounds silly. So those were my lessons learned.
I totally agree. I mean, as a student, I learned that asking questions in this environment is really important. In years past, used to be really scared of asking questions or sending emails to follow up about assignments. But because of the safety of virtual learning, I have been the most proactive with sending emails and following up and asking for help so that I could be more successful. And I've learned that teachers are actually more than happy to help you with your work. They're there for you. And I feel like that communication really is key. And I feel like this is a lesson that I'm going to be able to carry with me, not just next year to my school year, but also throughout life, that it's okay to communicate with people. It's not a scary thing.
Okay, so I emphasized at the very beginning time management. Time management is so important when it comes to education. And I didn't realize that until my senior year, which is funny. I don't even know how I survived all those years, but I did. Time management really helped me distribute and organize my assignments, my classes. And remember at the beginning, I did say I was late for classes, so I just implemented time management and it became so much easier. I had so much time in between to get my work done and still study for that upcoming test.
Some lesson learned for my case was sometimes it's not just enough time for covering everything, especially whenever it came to the snowy days in Texas and we lost a week of class. I needed to pick what are the best topic, what are the important topic that my students for sure need to know for doing better in the next courses. And that was one lesson learned too. Sometimes it's the time that you need to pick what to teach to students to be better supporting them for future. And another thing, not giving up and always pushing for collaboration, always trying to put them in group activities. There were some times that the students was not participating, giving them a task, making them, assigning a task and making them, making them more accountable was something that I learned. And I was doing it more often towards to the end, and let the students to teach and help each other first. If one of the students are willing to talk, let them talk, let that type of collaboration during the class time. If they want to use a whiteboard and share and show the example to students, I definitely was welcoming those. They were time consuming, but definitely will giving the better experience for them. And in general, talking to my students, listening to their words and trying to be supportive and compassion and empathy with them, and to best of my ability, what can I do for them to succeed in the course. And another thing, again, be clear. And I learned that in a hard way to and any announcement during the class time, posted a couple of times, posted in different places, and that's all. That's all for me.
The biggest lesson I learned is to never ever procrastinate. Because I've seen it happen so many times this year where people will go and procrastinate and they will get worked on unstacked and they will end up falling behind. I learned to make a schedule for myself throughout this year. So I have a designated time to what I do my assignments. I prefer to do my assignments after the school year or whenever I have time. So the material is fresh in your brain and you know what you're doing. Even if you had questions, you can just always ask the teacher, or they would post the notes in certain places, like Honda said, to find what you need help with. And time management is number one. If you can't time manage, you're gonna be unorganized and everything will start to fall apart, and it would show in your grades and how you act in front of people or your behavior in general.
I love that. I love what I heard. I was thinking about my own children, and time management was a huge learning lesson for them this year that I know will just carry them through the remainder of their educational career and allow them to be a lot more successful. Khalil, so I was with you. I'm not sure how my son made it to his junior year without time management, but we're here and we're going to make it. So I appreciate it. I also love this concept of like not making assumptions about our students and our families. I think that's so important. And I heard a lot from you, Huda, about just empathy, right? That I feel like we're being more empathetic to not just our students and our families, but also our educators, and understanding that we're all in a place of learning. And the more we can collaborate and support each other and be there, the more successful all of us can be. So thank you all for sharing that. This is the last question I have for the panel, and we may have a few more minutes for other guests to ask questions. If you have one, go ahead and throw it in the chat. We might have the chance to get to it. But my last question is, what is the one thing that you learned about yourself as a student or educator that makes you feel proud? And Marcia, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yes, thank you. So I am proud that I can truly call myself a lifelong learner. This year, I finished my master's degree. I received my principal's certificate. I learned new skills and concepts right alongside my students, which was awesome. We were all learning at the same time. And I have to say, there were days when my students taught me more than I taught them. I am not from the generation where I was born with a cell phone. And so there were times where, honestly, my students taught me so much about the computer and about Zoom, and just they would just sort of snicker at me and go, "You don't have to do it that way. Just hit this little button right here." You know, they were amazing. So, and I also learned that any opportunity you give a student to teach you something is another step in developing their own confidence. So, and I'm learning, I just want to say, learning from all of you young people about ways that you have overcome this, and y'all are totally on the right track. Bravo.
I feel so glad that I was able to get through this school year with a positive attitude and being able to manage my time, being able to communicate with my teachers, being able to maintain a language. I've been learning Chinese for 8 years now, and that was really hard to figure out how to balance all of the things going on in my life. I am a theater person, but I am an avid learner who loves school. To be honest, I love learning more than anything. And so being able to balance all of that in a time when it's so confusing was really great. And I feel like even though it was so tough, I've learned a lot from this, and it's going to end up helping me in the future in a positive way.
Okay, so this year was one of the most difficult years of my life so far. I don't know what God has planned for me in the future, but I hope it's not as worse as this. Okay, so I learned so many life lessons. Like my mom, she's a dean also at a nonprofit organization. So she doesn't have time to deal with all of her kids. So I'm the oldest, so I'm constantly like teaching my siblings, helping them with their homework, balancing my homework. And my dad is working too. So it's like we're out here on this little island, which is the kitchen table, trying to figure out how we're all gonna get our work done. And it really just taught me how the small things really do count. And I really did enjoy virtual learning, I would say, even though it was difficult. Because, oh my gosh, I'm gonna stop crying. Because it was just really, really difficult, man. Oh, yeah.
And for me, I've grown a lot during the past year, and I'm proud how I were able to adapt and respond on time to my students. And I was willing to jump and learn a lot of new things to be able to have and deliver the smoother lecture, smoother group activities, a smoother classroom experience, virtual classroom experience for my students, and being able to supporting them in the best way I could. For example, having a 10 o'clock Saturday exam review for them in a way that it's in any other way that I can help them. And it was enjoyable experience for me. And I'm glad that usually I heard a lot of positive feedback from my students, and that will told me that uh, I'm doing it. I'm doing well in that platform as well. It was a great experience for me.
One of the lessons I learned is learning how to be flexible. I'm a very flexible person, so if you are ever changing anything, I'll be okay. I can work with that. And I will, in the past years, I'm not a very sociable person. I'm very quiet and I usually like keep to myself. So learning how to branch out and be more social with people that you don't know, um, I'm very proud to do that now. And yeah, that's one of the biggest lessons I learned.
I'd say for me, my desire to continue to be involved and contribute to my community, and learning occurring beyond the classroom as well is exactly what I emphasized this year. I suddenly had all this free time because with college, your classes aren't back to back. You have blocks of time, and I was able to fill that up with tutoring and stepping up to leadership positions and attend these meetings. And it was balancing both screen time and what I was passionate about. And so I was really proud that I stepped out of my comfort zone and was able to step up to these leadership positions because I was learning all these different skills that you don't necessarily get in a classroom setting. And that was very rewarding for me.
Wow, thank you all so very much. I was wrong. We do not have time for additional questions, so I apologize to the rest of the guests. But I can't thank this panel enough. I mean, I'm looking at the chat coming in, and I think, you know, everyone's in an agreement. What an amazing group of individuals you are. From our students, just being able to overcome this pandemic year, but really identifying and staying true to who you are and understanding the way in which you learn and navigate through things and all the lessons learned. I'm just so incredibly proud of the four of you, and know that this won't be our last time to see or hear you, because I imagine one day you'll be much bigger and we'll run into you and be like, hey, I remember you. And thank you for being so vulnerable and so raw. This was an incredibly tough year. And the fact that you all overcame it, you should just be so proud of yourself. And I just know great things are going to happen. And thanks to our educators. I think, if anything, the spotlight was on you this year, and people realized, wow, you do work extremely hard. And thank you for sharing with us your lessons learned and kind of the process you went through personally to be able to adapt to this academic year and the focus that you put on your students. You definitely can see the love and care that was placed as we hear from these young individuals and the success that they had. So I can't thank you enough for being part of our guest panel today, for sharing with us. I know it's probably a lot, and I might get in trouble for doing it, but I'd love everyone to just unmute and just clap or do snaps because they've just been so incredible. And I think they deserve a round of applause.
Woo-woo.
Woo! Hooray.
Yay!
Amazing.
Great job.
Great job.
Awesome. Great job.
Impressive.
Hey, thank you
Beat you.
so much. And
You're amazing.
thank you, Jennifer, also, and the E3 team and our partner for assembling such an amazing panel, because you've taught us so much today about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, about how hasn't been as in-depth or as interactive as we'd like it to, but we learned how tough we could be, and we can collaborate and reach out to others. We can focus on the most important rather than trying to focus on everything. We can keep learning, and that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to spend this afternoon coming back and doing some breakout sessions in areas where we can keep learning together and we can accelerate change together.